Take a good look at yourself, Marcus. You're 30 years old and still rotting in a pathetic two-bedroom apartment. You rent your equipment, your bids crash and burn, and my sister is a registered nurse with a bright future. A broke loser like you is nothing but a parasitic burden holding her back. Everyone at this table looks down on you. So if you have any decency left, pack your things and get lost. Denise, my so-called sister-in-law, leaned forward and hurled those venomous, humiliating words right at my face in the middle of Sunday family dinner. Me, the man who crawled onto her mother's roof to fix it without charging a single dime, the man who stayed up all night driving her sister to hospital shifts, was now being turned into a laughingstock for the entire family. But I didn't utter a word in protest. I just smiled, calmly finishing the last bite of food on my plate. Denise thought she was above everyone, holding all the cards. She had absolutely no idea that in exactly 6 weeks, a single click of the send button on an email from me would reduce her entire scheme to ashes. Don't go anywhere, because you won't want to miss the ultimate payback that shattered her arrogance completely. Drop a comment with your city and local time right now so I can see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because the moment Craig makes the call that changes everything is something nobody saw coming. My name is Marcus Reed. I am 30 years old. I own a renovation and contracting business called Reed and Built that I started 6 years ago with $4,000, a secondhand truck, and a contractor's license I studied for while working 60-hour weeks for someone else. The business is real. It took 3 years to become profitable, and 2 more to become something I was proud of. I own my tools now. I have 3 full-time employees. Last year, we did $400,000 in revenue. The year before that was $280,000. I do not mention these numbers to people because I was raised by a man who believed that work spoke for itself, and in my experience, the men who talk loudest about their income are usually the ones least sure of it. I am telling you now because you need to understand the context in which Denise Torres Sullivan decided I was inadequate. I met Layla Torres 3 years ago at a Home Depot, which is the kind of origin story that is either charming or embarrassing depending on who is telling it. She was buying paint for her apartment. I was buying paint for a client's kitchen. She picked up the wrong shade of white, and I said, "That one reads yellow on the wall," and she looked at me with the specific expression of someone who has been given unsolicited advice and has not yet decided whether to be annoyed. She was not annoyed. She asked which one I would use. I showed her. We stood in the paint aisle for 45 minutes, talking about things that had nothing to do with paint. 3 years. That is what we built from a paint aisle in Home Depot. Let me fill in who we were before any of this, because the story does not make sense without that picture. Layla and I had been together for 3 years, and in those 3 years, we had built the kind of ordinary, specific, particular life that you can only build with time and attention. We had a corner table at a Vietnamese place on 5th that the owner held for us on Friday nights, because we had been coming every Friday for 2 years. We had an argument about whether to get a dog that lasted 8 months and ended when we agreed to wait until we had more space, which felt like a statement of intent about the future. We had a system for whose turn it was to bring coffee on Saturday mornings and whose turn it was to make it at home, and neither of us could remember when the system started, but we both knew the rules. That is what 3 years looks like. Not grand gestures, not big moments. The accumulated, specific, ordinary of 2 people who have decided to keep choosing each other. Layla had been hurt before me. She told me about it early, which I respected. Her previous relationship had ended after she found out the man had been cheating for the last year of their 2 years together. She had found out not from evidence or confrontation, but from him simply walking away and eventually telling her why. That kind of ending does something specific to a person. It does not make you suspicious of everyone. It makes you suspicious of yourself. You start asking why you didn't see it, what you missed, whether your own judgment can be trusted. Denise had been there for all of it. She had been the person Layla called at 2 in the morning when it fell apart. She had been the one who drove over and stayed and helped pick up the pieces. I understood why Layla trusted her the way she did. What I did not understand, for too long, was that Denise had filed that trust away as a claim. The man who cheated on Layla 3 years before she met me was gone. But the lesson Denise had drawn from it was not gone. The lesson Denise had drawn was that Layla needed protecting, and that the protection had to come from her, and that any man who came along was a potential repeat of what had happened before until proven otherwise. The problem was that Denise had appointed herself the arbiter of what proof looked like, and she had decided, before I walked through the door, that proof of my inadequacy would be easier to manufacture than proof of my worth. My best friend Darnell had warned me, not specifically about Denise, but about the dynamic. He had met Layla's sister twice. He had come to me afterward both times, with the same assessment. He said, "That woman has already decided how your story ends. She's not watching to see what happens. She's watching to confirm what she's already decided." I said, "She's protective." Layla went through something hard. Darnell said, "There's a difference between protective and proprietary." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm not sure you do." He was right. I understood the words, but I had not yet understood the stakes. Layla was 28. She worked 12-hour shifts in the ER at Riverside Medical and came home quiet in a specific way that meant the shift had been hard and she needed 20 minutes before she became herself again. I learned to have dinner ready and say nothing until she came to find me in the kitchen, which she always did. She was the kind of person who got better with more information, who asked follow-up questions, who remembered what you had said 3 weeks earlier and connected it to what you were saying now. She was also the kind of person who loved her family in a way that made the family's opinion of things matter more than it probably should have. Her family's opinion of me was managed almost entirely by her older sister Denise. Denise Torres Sullivan was 34. She was Layla's sister by Denise had been 14. She had, in the way of older children in incomplete families, taken on weight that wasn't hers to carry, and it had shaped her in the way that early weight always shapes people. It made her careful with money, strategic in relationships, and completely intolerant of what she called poor decisions, which was her term for any decision she would not have made herself. I understood, abstractly, where Denise came from. People who had to claw for stability tend to view anyone who reminds them of instability as a threat. What I did not understand was why I was the threat. I was not asking for Layla's money. I was not preventing her from saving. I was not a drain on anyone. I had simply chosen a professional path that did not look like what Denise had decided success looked like, and that was, apparently, enough. Her husband, Craig, was 36. He was a regional sales manager for a medical supply company and drove a company car and wore company clothes and had the particular exhaustion of a man who had been agreeing with his wife for so long that he had forgotten how to agreeing with his wife. Disagree. He was not a bad man. I want to say that clearly because Craig ends up in the middle of this story in a way that requires you to understand he was not bad, just weak in the specific way that comfortable people sometimes are. Layla's mother, Janet, was 58. She was a quiet woman who had raised 2 daughters, largely on her own, and had opinions she mostly kept inside unless directly asked. She came to my side of this story late, and she came there fully. But it took a while. The Sunday dinner where Denise told me I was holding Layla back was not an isolated moment. It was the most public, most direct version of a conversation that had been going on for 6 months. Let me give you those 6 months. Here is something I did not fully understand while the 6 months were happening. Denise was not reacting to evidence of my infidelity. She was creating the conditions under which Layla would be prepared to believe evidence that did not exist yet. This is the distinction that matters. A person who is genuinely suspicious of their sibling's partner watches and waits, and eventually either finds something or concludes there is nothing to find. What Denise was doing was different. She was building a belief system. She was doing it methodically and in sequence, and each piece depended on the pieces before it. Month 1, she established that I was unreliable, not through any specific act, but through framing. The brunch I missed became a pattern. Working late once became a habit. Being on my phone for work emails became suspicious behavior. She was not lying about individual facts. She was lying about what the individual facts meant, and she was doing it over a long enough period that Layla began to absorb the interpretation. Month 2, she established that I was secretive about money. The argument Layla and I had about finances was minor. It was the kind of argument couples have when they are figuring out how to combine their lives. Denise's advice about separate accounts was not financial prudence. It was a wedge. Keep your money separate in case you need to leave. Keep your money separate because you can't trust him. Those are different messages, but they sound the same. Month 3, she established that I had something to hide. The question of whether I checked Layla's phone was a setup. Whatever answer Layla gave, Denise had a response ready. If Layla said I never checked her phone, Denise had her line. Men who don't check their partner's phone are often the ones who have something to hide themselves. That is a completely unfalsifiable claim. There is no action I could take that Denise could not spin into evidence of guilt. Month 4, she established a habit in Layla of checking on me. The "where are you?" "who was there?" "send me a photo" questions. By the time Layla was asking those questions, she had been conditioned to ask them. She wasn't suspicious of me specifically. She had been made generally anxious, and I was the object of that anxiety. I kept answering because I had nothing to hide. What I didn't understand was that answering was also feeding the framing. Every answer I gave became material that Denise could reinterpret. Month 5 was the Instagram story. This one I think about the most because it was so small. I ate dinner at a restaurant. I posted a photo. Denise screenshotted it and showed Layla with a question attached. The question was designed to not have a good answer. Of course, I was going to say I was eating alone. Denise had already framed that as the suspicious answer. By month 6, when Denise stood up at her mother's table and told me to my face that I was holding Layla back, she did not need to convince Layla of anything new. She just needed to confirm what 6 months of careful cultivation had already planted. The profile and the fake screenshots were the harvest. 6 months of soil preparation for a single crop of manufactured evidence. I did not understand the full architecture until Craig laid it out for me in that phone call. But sitting in Darnell's apartment after Layla asked me to move out, I had a sense of it. I could feel the shape of something that had been built, even if I couldn't yet see all of it. That feeling is what kept me from picking up the phone and calling Layla in a panic. It kept me from going to Denise and confronting her with nothing. It kept me sitting with the level on the nightstand, thinking about what I actually knew and what I needed before I acted. Stay level. Stay true. My girlfriend had engraved those words for me a year and a half before any of this happened. She had understood something about me even then. The question was whether she could remember it clearly enough to hold on to it when someone she trusted was pulling her in a different direction. Month 1. A comment at Janet's house after I missed a family brunch because of a job site emergency. Must be nice to just cancel whenever you feel like it. Nurses can't do that, Layla. The implication being that my work was discretionary and hers was real. I let it go. Month 2. Layla and I had an argument about money, a minor one. The kind that healthy couples have and resolve. Someone mentioned it to Denise. I don't know who. 3 days later, Layla came home quieter than usual and said, "Denise thinks we should keep separate accounts. She says it's smarter." I said I thought we were fine, as we were. Layla said, "She's just looking out for me." I said okay. The seed had been planted and it wasn't mine. Month 3. Craig and Denise took Layla to dinner without me. I was on a weekend job, which they knew. When Layla came home, she mentioned that Denise had asked whether I ever checked her phone. I didn't. Layla said she had told Denise that. Denise had apparently said, "Men who don't check their partner's phone are often the ones who have something to hide themselves." I remember exactly how Layla said it. Like she was reporting it neutrally, like she was not sure what to think. Month 4. The questions started appearing. Small and occasional at first. Where were you today? Who was there? Can you send me a photo? I answered every time. Sent photos when she asked. I figured she was in a phase of anxiety, and it would pass. Month 5. A job put me in a neighborhood near a restaurant Layla and I used to go to. I grabbed dinner there solo after a long day. Posted an Instagram story of the food. Denise screenshotted it. Showed Layla. Said, "Who goes to a date restaurant alone?" The answer is, anyone who is tired and likes the pasta. But that was not Denise's interpretation. Month 6. The Sunday dinner. The public declaration that I was inadequate. Layla, saying nothing. That night, in the parking lot of Janet's house, I sat in the truck for a while before driving home. On the passenger seat was the spirit level Layla had given me for our first anniversary. She had it custom engraved. The metal read, "Stay level, stay true." She had said she picked those words because she thought they were the two most accurate things about me. I held it for a minute, turned it over. The bubble in the vial stayed perfectly centered. Then I drove home. I want to pause here and tell you what I was thinking during those 6 months, because it matters for what came next. I was not oblivious. I could see what was happening. Denise was running a slow campaign to make Layla see me as inadequate, unreliable, and potentially unfaithful. Each piece individually was small enough to dismiss. Together, they were building something. I could see the architecture of it even if I could not yet name every brick. What I chose to do was stay consistent. I did not get defensive with Layla every time a new comment reached me. I did not go to war with Denise directly. I just kept being exactly who I was, and trusted that Layla knew me well enough to see the pattern eventually. That was my mistake. Not my only one, but the most significant one. I trusted that 3 years of evidence would outweigh 6 months of targeted noise. I underestimated how good Denise was at what she was doing. And I underestimated how much the people who love us can be shaped by the people who love them. The fake profile appeared on a Tuesday. I was on a job site when Layla texted, "Can you come home tonight when you're done? Need to talk to you." Those 7 words. Every man in a relationship knows what those 7 words mean. I got home at 6. She was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with her phone face down in front of her. She had been crying before I walked in. Her eyes had the specific redness that said the crying had been going on for a while. I sat down across from her. I did not ask what was wrong. I waited. She picked up the phone, turned it over, slid it across the table. It was a screenshot of a dating profile. The photo was mine. Or rather, it was a photo of me that had been posted on my Instagram 14 months ago. A photo from a job site. Good lighting. Half smile. The kind of photo that when you take it, you don't think much of it. And then it gets more engagement than anything else you post that month. The name on the profile was not mine. It said Marco, 30, contractor. Close enough. I picked up the phone, looked at it for a long time. I said, "Where did you get this?" She said, "Denise." I said, "This isn't me." She said, "It looks like you." I said, "It's my photo from Instagram from over a year ago. Someone copied it and made a fake profile." She said, "Why would someone do that?" I said, "I don't know. But Layla, look at the name. Marco. That's not my name." She said, "People use different names on those apps." I said, Is that what Denise said? She looked at me. Don't make this about Denise. I said. Who showed you this? Silence. I said. Layla. Who showed you this? She said. Denise found it. A friend of hers uses the app. The friend matched with this profile and sent the screenshot to Denise. I said, does this friend have a name? She said, why does that matter? It mattered because I wanted to verify whether the friend existed. But saying that out loud in that moment would have sounded like deflection, so I did not say it. I said, can I see the full profile? Not just the picture, the whole thing. She said, that's all there is. The screenshot. A screenshot. One screenshot. One photo that Denise's unnamed friend had allegedly captured from a dating app and sent to Denise, who had sent it to Layla. I said, I do not have a dating profile. I have never had a dating profile since the day we met. You can check my phone right now. You can check my computer. You can check every email account I have. She said she believed me, but the way she said it, the specific quality of her voice, that was not the voice of someone who believed. That was the voice of someone who was trying to believe and not quite getting there. I should have known then. 3 days after the profile, the conversation screenshots appeared. I came home from work and Layla was on the couch. She did not look up when I came in. She just held her phone out toward me. This time, there were 4 screenshots. They showed a text conversation between what appeared to be my phone number and a contact named Sarah. The messages were flirtatious. They were the kind of messages that people write when they are building towards something. They were detailed enough to be specific and recent enough to be damning. I read them twice. My hands were steady. I want you to know that. After 3 years in construction, you develop a particular physical calm under pressure because panicking on a job site is not an option. My hands were steady. I said, these are fabricated. She said, that's your number. I said, that's not how I write. Read any text I've ever sent you. I don't use that punctuation. I don't write like that. She said, people write differently to different people. I said, Layla, I want you to look at me and tell me you actually believe I sent these. She looked at me. Her eyes were full. She said, I want to believe you didn't. That sentence. I want to believe you didn't. After 3 years. After every job I stayed on, because I was trying to build something real. After every 6 a.m. shift drop-off and every meal I had ready when she came home from a brutal day in the ER. After all of it, I want to believe you didn't. I said, these came from Denise. She said, stop making everything about Denise. I said, did they come from Denise? She said nothing. I said, did they? She said, Denise's friend. The one who matched with the profile. She said Marcus reached out to her, started talking. Those are the messages. I said, Denise's friend. The same friend who found the profile, the same friend I've never heard of, who matched with a profile that has my photo but a different name. And now she has screenshots of conversations she supposedly had with me. Layla said, why would Denise make this up? That was the question. At the time, I did not have the full answer. I had theories. I knew Denise had never liked me. I knew she had been running a slow campaign for 6 months, but I did not yet have the specific why. I said, I don't know the full reason yet, but I know that I did not send these messages, and I need you to trust that. She said, I'm trying, but trying was not enough. I could see it. The weight of 6 months of planted seeds and 1 month of manufactured evidence had done exactly what it was designed to do. 2 days later, she asked me to move out. She said she needed time to think. She said she wasn't sure about anything anymore. She said it wasn't fair to either of us to keep going when she had doubts. She said the right things in the wrong order. The tone of the conversation was not angry. It was careful. It was the tone of someone who had been coached on what to say. I packed a bag. I stayed with my best friend Darnell for a week. I went to work every day. I came home to Darnell's apartment every night. I sat on the couch in the spare room and stared at the ceiling and thought about 3 years and what they were worth and what I was going to do about it. I had the spirit level on the nightstand. I had brought it with me without consciously deciding to. The call came on a Thursday, 8:47 in the evening. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered. The voice said, "Marcus. It's Craig. Craig Sullivan. Denise's husband." I said, "Craig?" He said, "Yeah. Listen, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." I said, "Go ahead." He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Denise made the profile. The dating profile with your photo. She made the fake screenshots too. There was no friend. She did it herself." The room went very quiet around me. I said, "Say that again." He said, "She created a fake dating profile using your Instagram photo. She created a fake female contact in her own phone, screenshotted a fake conversation she wrote herself, and presented it to Layla as proof you were cheating." I said, "Craig, why are you telling me this?" He said, "Because I watched you sit at that dinner table last month and take what she said to you with more grace than I have ever managed. And then I came home and found out she had done this, and I can't live with it." I said, "How long have you known?" He said, "I found out 2 weeks ago. I went through her tablet, looking for a document she'd asked me to send her. I saw the profile she built. I saw the screenshots. She had a folder. Marcus, there was a whole folder. Planning documents, notes about what to say to Layla, what to show her first, what to save for when Layla started to doubt. This wasn't an impulse. She had been working on this for 3 months. 3 months. While I had been going to Sunday dinners and fixing Janet's gutters and driving Layla to hospital shifts, Denise had been in a folder on her tablet building the case that would end my relationship. I said, "Craig, I need you to understand that what you're telling me is going to have consequences." He said, "I know." I said, "For you too. Not just for Denise." He said, "I know that too." I said, "Why did she do it?" He was quiet again. Then he said, "She's done it before. To Layla's last boyfriend. 3.5 years ago. I only found out about that one 2 weeks ago too, when I saw the notes from this time that referenced the first time. She called it the method. Like she had a method. The method." My former suspicion hardened into something that had a specific weight and shape. I said, "Craig, I'm going to need you to say this again. On a recorded call." He said, "I figured you'd say that." He called back 4 minutes later. I hit record. He repeated everything. He was calm. His voice did not waver. He had made a decision before he called me the first time, and the decision was full. I did not call Layla that night. I did not call Denise. I did not do anything that night, except sit with what I knew and think about what to do with it. In the morning, I called Darnell. He sat across the kitchen table from me while I played him Craig's recording. He listened without speaking until it was done. Then he said, "What's the plan?" I said, "Evidence first. Action second." He said, "What evidence?" I said, "The profile. I want to know exactly when it was created and how. Craig said she used my Instagram photo. I want a forensic analysis of the screenshot metadata. I want to find out whether the profile still exists and when it was set up." Darnell said, "You know someone who can do that?" I did. I had done renovation work 2 years earlier for a woman named Ashley Kim who had a digital forensics consulting practice. She owed me a favor in the way that clients sometimes do when a job is done right and on time and under budget, and nobody else in the neighborhood could do it. I called her that morning. She called back at noon. I explained what I had and what I needed. She said, "Send me the screenshot of the profile. If it's still live, I can find the creation date. If it's been deleted, the metadata from the screenshot may still have timestamp information from when the screenshot was taken, which I can cross-reference against the date the profile supposedly existed." She also said, "The screenshot conversation with the woman. Send that too. Different messaging platforms have different timestamp formats. If the screenshot was fabricated using a text message generator rather than an actual conversation, there are visual tells. I can spot them." I sent everything. I want to tell you more about that first call from Craig, because the details of it matter. He called at 8:47. I know because I looked at the time when I answered an unknown number, which is a habit I have, checking the time when something unexpected happens, so that I have the sequence right in my memory afterward. His voice was not panicked. It was the voice of a man who had made a decision in advance of the call and was executing it. Calm, but with something underneath. The specific quality of calm that comes when someone has been carrying a weight for longer than it was supposed to take. He said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." I said, "Go ahead." And then he did. He was organized. He told me about finding the folder. He told me about the planning documents, which were notes Denise had kept in a folder on her personal tablet labeled, according to Craig, L. situation, which is the kind of clinical detachment that is both efficient and chilling. He told me about the photo pull, which he had seen dated in a file Denise had not bothered to delete. He told me that there was no friend, that the whole friend cover story had been Denise operating the accounts herself, showing Layla screenshots she had made on her own phone. I said, when he finished, "Craig, why are you telling me this?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I want to give you accurately because I think it matters. He said, "Because I have been letting Denise run things in our house for 11 years, and I always told myself it was because she was smarter about most things, which is true, but also because disagreeing with her costs something, and I stopped being willing to pay it. And then I found that folder, and I thought about you sitting at that dinner table last month, not saying a word, while she told you that you weren't good enough. And I thought about the fact that you're going to have to rebuild your relationship or rebuild your life without the person you've been with for 3 years. And the only reason any of that is happening is because my wife decided it should. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't be the person who knew and said nothing." He said, "I've been the person who knew and said nothing for 11 years. I'm done being that person." That was why he called. Not because he calculated that it would benefit him. Not because he had an angle. Because he had reached a specific internal point where the cost of saying nothing was higher than the cost of saying something. I thought about that for a long time afterward. The threshold at which people who have been quiet decide to stop. What it takes to reach it. Whether Craig would have reached it without finding the folder, or whether he had been building toward it for years, and the folder was just the point at which he could no longer pretend. I don't know the answer, but I know that the decision he made on that phone call was the most significant thing Craig Sullivan had done in a long time, and I suspect he knew it too. He called back 4 minutes after we hung up. I pressed record before I answered. He went through it again, every detail. He spoke for 11 minutes. When he was done, I said, "Craig, thank you." He said, "Yeah," and hung up. She called back in 48 hours. She said, "Marcus, the dating profile was created 11 weeks ago. The photo used was pulled from your Instagram account on a specific date I can verify. The profile was created 4 days after that photo was pulled. Now, here's the important part. The photo was pulled from your Instagram 14 months before the date of the profile. Someone saved it, held it for 10 months, and then built a profile around it 11 weeks ago. Planned, built, held, she said. The conversation screenshots. They're fabricated. The timestamp format is wrong for the platform. That platform stopped using that format in an update 18 months ago. Whoever made these screenshots used a third-party text generator that hadn't been updated. The timestamps are in a format that platform hasn't used for a year and a half. She said, I'm writing up a technical report. Give me 2 days. I said, thank you, Ashley. She said, this is the cleanest manufactured evidence case I've seen in 3 years. Whoever did this was careful, but not careful enough. Not careful enough. Denise had built something elaborate enough to fool her sister, and careful enough that a casual observer would not question it. But she had not anticipated that someone would hire a forensic analyst to look at the metadata. She had not anticipated that her husband would call me. She had not anticipated what I was about to do. I did not confront Denise. I did not call Layla with what I had found. I did not go to Janet's house or send messages to anyone in that family. I sent one email. Layla's email address, which I still had, obviously, because 3 years of partnership produces a great deal of practical contact information that does not expire when the relationship does. The email had 9 attachments. Attachment 1. Ashley Kim's technical forensic report, 8 pages, explaining the dating profile creation date, the Instagram photo pull date, and the timeline inconsistency. Attachment 2. Ashley's analysis of the fake conversation screenshots, identifying the timestamp format error, and explaining what it proved. Attachment 3. A full-length recording of Craig Sullivan's second phone call, in which he stated clearly, without pressure, that Denise had fabricated both pieces of evidence and that there was a planning folder on her personal tablet. Attachment 4. My credit card statements for the 4 weeks during which the fake conversation with Sarah was supposedly taking place, showing my location-tagged purchases, none of which were in any area that contradicted where I said I was on any day. Attachment 5. My phone carrier records for the same 4 weeks, showing outgoing call and text logs that did not include any number matching the contact in the fabricated screenshots. Attachment 6. A screenshot of my own Instagram account with the date of the photo Denise had used for the profile, showing it had been posted 14 months before the profile existed. Attachment 7. A directory lookup on the phone number shown in the fake screenshots, confirming it did not belong to anyone named Sarah and was a number associated with a third-party text message generator service. Attachment 8. A statement from Ashley Kim, signed, attesting to her professional qualifications and the accuracy of her findings. Attachment 9. A screenshot of Denise's Sunday dinner speech. I had not recorded it, but Darnell had been there that evening, and Darnell had a very precise memory. And Darnell had written down what Denise had said almost verbatim when he got home because he had been, in his words, so angry he needed to put it somewhere. His written account was dated the same day. The email had 3 sentences of text. I wrote, "Here is what actually happened. I have said everything I have to say. You know where to find me." I sent it at 9:47 on a Thursday night. Then I put my phone face down on Darnell's coffee table and watched a baseball game I did not care about until midnight. I did not check my phone before I went to sleep. I want to tell you what the 48 hours after I sent the email felt like, because that period is where the story really happened for me. The email went out at 9:47 on Thursday. I did not check my phone that night. I set it on the coffee table face down and left it there. Darnell had gone to bed. I watched the rest of the baseball game, which ended in extra innings with a result I could not have told you an hour later. I was not numb. I want to be clear about that. I was not operating on autopilot or shutting feelings out. I was doing something that is harder than either of those things, which is feeling everything fully and not letting the feeling determine what I did next. I was angry. The anger was specific and had a shape and a name and a detailed history going back 6 months, plus 3 more months of planning that I had not known about. It was not the kind of anger that makes you want to yell. It was the kind that makes you want things to be exactly what they are, exactly as documented, exactly accounted for. The kind of anger that prefers precision. I was sad. The sadness was about Layla, and also about something larger than Layla, which was the specific pain of discovering that something you built carefully over 3 years can be dismantled by someone who was never inside it. Denise had not been part of what Layla and I built. She had operated from outside it and still brought it down. That was a kind of grief for the vulnerability of things, not just for the thing itself. I was also, and I say this honestly, relieved. The relief of having done something clean after weeks of confusion. The email was everything I knew in organized form, sent to the right person, with nothing embellished and nothing withheld. After weeks of not knowing what to do, doing the right specific thing felt like setting a tool down after a long day of work. On Friday, I went to the Maplewood kitchen project. The tile work required measuring twice, cutting once, checking the level on every row. I laid 342 tiles that day. Everyone was square. On Saturday, Darnell and I got breakfast. He asked how I was. I said tired, but clear. He said that was a reasonable place to be. We talked about the baseball game. We talked about a mutual friend's upcoming move. We did not talk about Layla or Denise or Craig for most of the meal, which was exactly right. On Sunday evening, Layla knocked on the door, and I have told you what happened in that conversation. What I have not told you is what happened after she left, after she put the spirit level on the coffee table and walked out. I sat in Darnell's living room for about an hour. Darnell came out and sat across from me, and we did not say much. At some point, he made tea, which Darnell does not normally do, and I realized he was doing it because he did not know what else to do and needed something to occupy his hands, which is a thing I understand because I am usually the same way. I picked up the level, turned it over. The bubble centered itself. Darnell said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know yet." He said, "Yes, you do." I said, "I know what I want. I'm still deciding if what I want is what I should do." He said, I said, "And I'm going to give it 3 more weeks and see where she is." He said, "That's very measured of you." I said, "That's the job." He looked at the level in my hands. He said, "She got that engraved." I said, "First anniversary?" He said, "Stay level, stay true." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You think she knew what she was writing?" I said, "I think she wrote what she saw at the time." He said, "And now?" I said, "Now she's deciding whether to see it again. That's her work, not mine." The next morning, I went to work. I had a kitchen renovation in progress in a house on Maplewood that needed tile work, and tile work requires a specific kind of focus that does not leave room for other things. I worked from 7 to 4. I ate lunch in the truck. I listened to the radio. My phone had 18 messages by the time I checked it at 5. 3 from Layla. 5 from Denise. 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. That turned out to be Craig and Janet. 1 from Darnell asking how I was. 7 from unknown numbers that I did not open. I called Darnell. He said, "How are you?" I said, "Working." He said, "Good. That's the right answer." I said, "What have you heard?" He said, "Layla called you yet?" I said, "She texted." He said, "What did she say?" I said, "She said she needed to talk to me." He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Give her 3 days." He said, 3 days. I said, "If she wants to talk to me, she has time to process what's in that email, do whatever she needs to do with her family, and come to me as herself rather than as someone who just had the rug pulled out." I don't want the first conversation to be all shock and guilt. I want the conversation that matters, Darnell said. That is either very wise or very cold, I said. Could be both. I did not respond to Layla for 3 days. I went to work. I came back to Darnell's. I ate. I slept. I thought about things. On the second day, I went to a hardware store and bought 3 things I needed for the kitchen project and stood in the tool aisle for a while looking at levels. All the same colors. All the same principle. Fin the line. Hold it. Don't drift. On the third day, at 6:45 in the evening, Layla knocked on Darnell's door. Darnell looked through the peephole, looked at me, raised both eyebrows, and went to his bedroom without a word. I opened the door. She looked like someone who had not slept well in 3 days, which was accurate, because I had not slept well in 3 days either, and I suspected we were both running on the same kind of depleted, wired alertness that comes from processing something too big to process all at once. She said, "Can I come in?" I stepped back. She sat on Darnell's couch. I sat in the chair across from it. The coffee table was between us, which was appropriate. She said, I confronted Denise. I said, "Okay," she said. I played her the recording. The whole Craig call. I said, "What did she say?" Layla looked at her hands. At first, she said Craig had misunderstood, that the profile was something she'd built as a joke to show me what a fake profile looks like, that she never intended to use it as real evidence. I said, "And," she said. And I told her about the forensics report, the metadata, the timestamp errors in the screenshots, the photo pull date from Instagram. I said, "And," she said. She stopped talking for a while. And then she said that she had done it because she was afraid I was going to get hurt the same way she had watched our mom get hurt, that she had watched our dad leave, and she had spent 20 years making sure that didn't happen to me, and you felt like someone who was going to leave eventually, so she thought she was helping. The room was quiet. I said, "Is that what you think? That I was going to leave?" She said, "No." I said, "Did you think that before she started?" She said, "No." I said, "She built the belief that I would leave. She manufactured it. Over 6 months, and then with fabricated evidence. And you went along with it." Layla said, "I know." I said, "Layla, I want to be direct with you. I am not angry at you for being manipulated. I am angry at you for the specific thing you chose in the middle of it. You had a boyfriend of 3 years who had never given you a reason to doubt him. You had one screenshot of a fake profile with a different name. You had fabricated text messages, and instead of coming to me and saying, 'This doesn't make sense. Can we figure this out together?' You asked me to leave." She said, "I was scared." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I believe you." She said, "Can we?" I said, "Not yet." She looked at me. I said, "You need to understand what I mean by not yet. I'm not done. I haven't decided anything, but I am not going to make a decision in this room tonight based on how much I missed you, which is a lot. I need time. The same time you took without giving me a fair conversation." She nodded. Her eyes were bright. She said, "What can I do?" I said, "Go handle your family. Handle Craig. Handle Denise. Handle your mother, who I imagine has thoughts. Do all of that. And let me think." She stood up. She reached into her bag. She put the spirit level on the coffee table. The engraved one. "Stay level. Stay true," she said. "You left this at the apartment." She left. I sat with the level on the coffee table for a long time. Darnell came out of his bedroom at some point and sat down across from me and did not say anything. After a while, I picked up the level. The bubble was centered. I was not present for the conversation between Layla and Denise. I have pieced together what happened from 3 sources. What Layla told me, what Craig told me later, and what Janet told me in her phone call. Here is what I understand of it. Layla called Denise on a Friday morning, the day after she received my email. She did not call to accuse. She called to ask. She sent Denise the forensic report and said, "Can you explain this?" Denise's first response was exactly what Craig had predicted when I told him what I was planning. She said the profile was something she had built as an example to show Layla what a fake profile looks like, that it was never intended as actual evidence. Layla played her Craig's recording. Denise did not speak for what Layla described as a long time. The silence on the phone was specific enough that Layla thought the call had dropped. Then Denise said, "Craig had no right to do that." Layla said, "Denise, did you make this up?" Denise said, "I was trying to protect you." Layla said, "From what?" "From a man who has never done anything wrong. From 3 years of someone who has been nothing but good to me." Denise said, "I was protecting you from what he was eventually going to do." That sentence. What he was eventually going to do. The future crime. The preemptive punishment for an act that had never happened and there was no reason to believe would happen. Layla said, "How do you know what he was eventually going to do?" Denise said, "Because they all do eventually." This is the root of it. This is what Denise had been operating from under all the strategy and the planning and the manufacturing. They all do eventually. The belief, formed somewhere in the years after their father left, that all men leave, that betrayal is not a possibility but an inevitability, and that the only question is when and whether you are prepared. Layla told me she said to her sister, Denise, "He didn't leave. You made me push him out." Denise said, "You'll thank me eventually." Layla said, "I have never done anything to you that would make you think you have the right to decide who I love." Denise did not answer that. Layla said, "I'm done. I need space from you." Then she hung up. Craig told me that Denise had come home from that call in a state he described as something he had never seen from her before. Not anger. Something quieter. He said she sat at the kitchen table for an hour without speaking, and then she said to him, "I went too far." That was the admission. 3 words. I went too far. Not I was wrong. Not I fabricated evidence. Not I deliberately destroyed my sister's relationship. I went too far, which still implies that the direction was correct, and only the distance was the error. Craig and I had a third call about 2 weeks after everything broke open. He was not calling to report or to update. He was calling because he needed to talk to someone who was not Denise or Layla or their mutual friends, all of whom were now navigating the fallout in ways that required careful management. He said, "She's not a bad person. I need you to know I believe that." I said, "I know." He said, "She built something terrible out of something she genuinely believes is protection." I said, "The road to genuine harm is usually built from things people genuinely believe." He said, "Yeah." A pause. "How's Layla?" I said, "Doing the work." He said, "And you?" I said, "Working on it." He said, "I'm glad you sent that email, even though it blew everything up." I said, "Would you have wanted to keep going the way things were?" He said, "No." I said, "Then it needed to blow up." The fallout in Layla's family ran along lines I could track from a distance, through what Layla told me in the weeks that followed. Craig and Denise had a crisis that was still ongoing as of when I am telling you this story. Craig had called me without Denise knowing. The call had been recorded and used. Denise saw that as betrayal. Craig saw it as the only right thing he knew how to do. They were in couples counseling. Whether their marriage survived is not my story to tell. Janet called me 2 weeks after the Darnells' couch conversation. She did not have my new number. She called the business line. She said, "Marcus, "This is Janet Torres. I want to apologize." I said, "You don't have to." She said, "I do. I sat at my table and let Denise say those things to you. I should have stopped her. I was afraid of making a scene with my own daughter, and I let you be humiliated in my house. That was wrong of me." I said, "Thank you, Janet." She said, "Denise has always done this. She controlled who her last boyfriend's friends were. She pressured a college roommate out of a relationship she thought was wrong. This is her pattern. I knew it, and I did not stop it." I said, "I know about the last time. With Layla's previous boyfriend." She said, "Craig found the notes." I said, "He told me." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She thinks she's protecting people. I think she's been afraid her whole life since their father left, and she is still managing that fear in the worst possible ways." She paused. "That is not an excuse. I want to be clear about that. I'm explaining, not excusing." I said, "I understand the difference." She said, "Is there any chance you'll give Layla another shot?" I said, "I'm thinking about it, Janet." She said, "She's changed. In 3 weeks she has changed. I don't know if that's enough, but I want you to know I'm seeing something real." I said, "I'll see it when I see it." She said, "Fair enough." 4 weeks after I sent the email, Layla called and asked if I could meet her somewhere. We met at a park near the river. Neutral ground. She was already on a bench when I arrived. She had coffee. She had brought me one too, which was either presumptuous or considerate, and probably both. We sat for a while without talking much. "Watching the river," she said. "I fired a patient's family member last week. They were being aggressive with the nursing staff. My charge nurse wanted to handle it diplomatically. I said no. This is the line." I said, "What happened?" She said, "They were angry. But I held the line, and everyone on my floor knew I held it." She looked at the river. "I've been thinking about that a lot, about what it means to hold a line when someone you trust is pushing you across it." I said, "And?" She said, "I didn't hold the line with you. Denise pushed and I moved. Because I'd been moving every time she pushed since I was 8 years old and I didn't know how to stop." I said, "I know," she said. "I'm in therapy. Have been for 3 weeks. Working on exactly that." I said, "Good," she said. "Not for you. For me. I need that to be clear." I said, "I know that too." She said, "So what are you thinking?" I said, "I'm thinking that I miss you, and I'm still angry at you simultaneously, and I've been trying to figure out which one is louder." She said, "Which one is?" I said, "Depends on the day." She laughed once. A short, honest laugh. The kind she made when something surprised her. I said, "Here's what I need if we try again. And I mean try. No guarantees." She said, "Tell me." I said, "If someone tells you something about me, you come to me first. Not after. First. Before you let it sit. Before you tell me you need space. Before you do anything, you come to me." She said, "Yes." I said, "If you have doubts, you tell me. Not your sister, not your coworker. Me. I would rather have an uncomfortable conversation than watch you disappear into someone else's version of me." She said, "Yes," I said, "and I need you to understand that I am not fragile. I can hear your fears if you tell them to me directly. What I cannot survive is being managed by other people's interpretations of my behavior." She said, "I hear you." I said, "Okay." She said, "Okay?" I said, "We try. Slow. Real. No pretending the last few months didn't happen." She looked at me with the expression I remembered from the paint aisle in Home Depot. The one where she was deciding whether to be annoyed and landed somewhere else entirely. She said, "I'll take it." We sat by the river until the coffee was cold. The 3 months between Darnell's couch and the river park bench were not nothing. I want to give them to you because they were the actual substance of the story, in a way that the dramatic moments were not. I went back to my apartment after 10 days at Darnell's. Layla and I had shared that apartment for the last year and a half of our relationship, though her name was not on the lease. Going back into it after she left required me to reorganize the entire space in my head. Things that had belonged to both of us belonged only to me now. Habits we had built together needed to be rebuilt alone or rebuilt differently. I moved furniture. Not dramatically. Just slightly. Changed where things were in the kitchen, so I was working from different positions. Moved the couch to face the window differently. Changed the things on the windowsill. Not to erase anything, but to make the space mine in a way it had not been entirely mine for a while. The spirit level went on the workbench in the small storage space I used for tools. That was where it lived before Layla had given it to me. In my head, at least. In my sense of where things belonging to the work went. I did not put it there to be symbolic. I put it there because it was a tool, and tools go where tools belong. I worked. 4 renovation projects in those 3 months. 2 medium-sized and 2 small. I kept the schedule I had before any of this happened, and I did not let the disruption in my personal life disrupt the work, which is a discipline I learned from my father, who had the same policy about everything. Darnell checked on me twice a week. He did not make a project of it. He would text asking if I wanted to watch the game, which was his way of checking in that required nothing from me emotionally. If I did not have anything emotionally available. Sometimes I watched the game. Sometimes I said maybe next week. He never pushed. I thought about Layla every day. I want to be honest about that. The thought was not always the same. Sometimes it was missing her specifically. The coffee on Saturday morning, and the Friday Vietnamese place, and the way she got quiet after a hard shift. Sometimes it was anger. The specific anger of knowing what had been done, and that she had participated in it even if she had been the one manipulated. Sometimes it was something I would describe as grief for a version of things that might have continued undisturbed if Denise had been a different kind of person. About 6 weeks in, I ran into Janet at the hardware store. She was buying weather stripping for a door. I helped her find the right kind because I knew the door she was talking about from work I had done at her house. We stood in the aisle for a few minutes and did not make it awkward, which told me something about Janet that I had not fully registered before. She said, "Layla's doing better." I said, "I'm glad." She said, "She's changed something. I don't know how to explain it exactly. She's more direct. With me? With her coworkers? With herself?" I said, "Good." Janet said, "She asks for what she wants now instead of managing around what she thinks she can have." I thought about that for a while afterward. Asking for what you want instead of managing around what you think you can have. That is a significant shift. It is also the exact opposite of what Denise modeled. Denise's entire system was built on managing. Managing outcomes, managing perceptions, managing people. Layla had spent 34 years watching that system up close and absorbing it in ways she had not been aware of. If she was unlearning it, that was real work. Real work takes time, and the results show up in hardware store conversations with parents who notice. 8 weeks in, I called Ashley Kim to thank her properly for the forensic report. She said, "Did it do what it needed to do?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Good." You know what the most interesting part of that case was for me professionally? I said, "What?" She said, "Whoever made those screenshots was careful. They used a real platform's interface format. The timestamp error is subtle. You'd miss it if you weren't specifically looking for it, and most people wouldn't know to look for it. The only reason I caught it is because I keep a database of platform UI changes for exactly this kind of case." She said, Whoever did this was not improvising. They had done research. The planning documents Craig had found. The method Denise had referenced from the previous time. She had been getting better at this. She had run a version of this scheme before, and she had refined it. I said, there was a previous time. With Layla's last boyfriend. Ashley said, then it's a pattern, and patterns tend to continue until something breaks them. Something had broken this one. Whether the break was permanent was Denise's work to do. It was not mine. There is a thing I want to say before you go, and I want to say it plainly. What Denise did was not protective. It was control wearing the costume of protection. There is a difference, and it matters. People who love you do not manufacture evidence of your partner's infidelity. People who love you do not build planning folders and design methods and run campaigns over 3 months to end your relationship with someone who has given you no real reason to leave. People who love you say, I am worried about this. I want to talk about it. Can we look at this together? The version of love that requires destroying someone else's credibility to maintain its own position is not love. It is ownership. And the thing about ownership is this. It does not care whether you are hurt in the process. It cares whether it maintains control. Denise was not afraid I would hurt Layla. She was afraid Layla would not need her anymore. That is a different thing. And knowing the difference is what gives you the ability to recognize it when it is happening to you. The second thing I want to say is about Layla. She made real mistakes. She chose her sister's manufactured evidence over 3 years of consistent reality. She asked me to leave without giving me a fair conversation. Those are facts, and they hurt, and they are not erased by her apology. But she also did something that a lot of people do not do when they are caught in the middle of a mess, and began the actual work of changing the pattern rather than just saying she would. That is not nothing. It is not everything, but it is something. I am not telling you to take someone back who has wronged you. I am telling you that people can do real work, and sometimes the real work is visible, and sometimes visible real work is worth something. You get to decide what it is worth in your own life. I decided what it was worth in mine. The day Layla and I met at the river park, she had brought me coffee. She knew I would not refuse because it was from the Vietnamese place on 5th, and she had ordered it correctly from memory. That is a small thing. But small things are where love actually lives. I did not tell her that getting the order right meant something. I just drank the coffee and let it be what it was. She knew what she had done. She did not mention it. We both let it sit between us without naming it, and I think that was the right call. The conversation at the river was also the first conversation we had in months, where I felt like I was talking to Layla, and not to a version of Layla that had been filtered through someone else's framework. The directness Janet had described in the hardware store was real. She said what she meant. She did not manage around it, or hedge, or run her words through the internal check of will this be okay to say. She just said it. That is who she had been in the paint aisle 4 years earlier. Direct, a little blunt, completely her own. Somewhere in 6 months of Denise's campaign, she had stopped being that person and started being a person trying to navigate what her sister wanted from her. The therapy was bringing the original person back, slower than the loss had happened, but steady. When she asked if there was a chance we could try again, the version of me that had been angry for 3 months wanted to say no cleanly and finally and let it be finished. The version of me that had been sitting with a spirit level on a workbench saying, stay level, stay true, wanted to say yes immediately. What I said was, we try. Slow, real, no pretending. Which is the honest answer? The one that respects what happened without either dismissing it or letting it make the final call. I am telling you this story several months into that try. I will not tell you it has been easy, because it has not. We have had conversations that required more honesty than either of us was comfortable with. We have had moments where I felt the old anger come back, and had to say it out loud instead of carrying it quietly the way I used to carry things. She has had moments where the old pattern of managing and hedging started to show up, and she caught herself and said so. Neither of us is doing it perfectly, but both of us are doing it actually, which is harder and more important than perfect. The spirit level is still on the workbench. I pick it up sometimes when I am starting a new job. The way you pick up something that grounds you before you begin something that requires precision. The engraving is worn at the edges from handling. Stay level, stay true. She wrote those words about who I was. I am trying to keep being that person through all of this. I think she is trying to become the version of herself that chose those words. That is the work. That is all it ever is. The work. One more thing happened that I have not told you yet, because it happened quietly, and I was not sure it belonged in this story, but I think it does. About 2 months after everything came out, I got a text from an unknown number. One line. It said, "I'm sorry for what I did. I know that doesn't fix it." I looked at the number for a long time. I did not have it saved, but I recognized the area code. It was Denise's mobile carrier area. I did not respond. I saved the text in a folder labeled the same way I labeled the email folder, and I let it sit there. I don't know what Denise was hoping for when she sent it. Maybe she was hoping I would respond and give her something. Absolution or anger. Either one. Maybe she was just saying it because it needed to be said out loud and I was the person who needed to hear it and she could not figure out another way. I thought about what it would mean to respond. I thought about what forgiveness looks like in a situation like this, where the harm was deliberate and sustained and built from a very specific understanding of how to break something. I thought about whether forgiveness is something I owe or something I offer when I am ready, or something that has a condition attached to it. I did not have a clean answer. I still do not. What I know is this. The work she did was real. The damage was real. The planning documents. The method. The 3-month folder. The previous time with Layla's last boyfriend. Those things happened. They cannot be unhappened by a text message, no matter how genuinely it was sent. Whether Denise changes, whether she seeks help for whatever drove her to build this system, whether Craig stays or goes, whether she and Layla eventually find their way back to each other as sisters, none of that is mine to manage. It is not my work to do. It is hers. And the doing or not doing of it will show up in the life she builds from here, which I will mostly not be watching. What is mine to do is already clear. Be who I am. Do the work in front of me. Hold the line when someone tries to push me across it, and say so, instead of absorbing it quietly. Love the person I love in a way that requires her to see me accurately, rather than through someone else's lens. Stay level. Stay true. Those are the 2 instructions. Everything else is application. I have been doing this work my whole adult life, with lumber and drywall and pipes and wiring. You measure, you cut, you fit, you check the level. If something is off, you do not pretend it is straight. You take it apart and do it right. The work is honest, or it fails. There is no version in between. I am applying the same standard to everything else now. It is not complicated. It is just hard. It is always just hard. Before you go, leave a comment below. If you were in my position after getting that call from Craig, what is the first thing you would have done? Confront Denise? Call Layla immediately? Or do what I did, which was sit on it and build the case first? Tell me. And drop your city and local time in the comments too, because I put real work into this story and I want to know how far it traveled. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who's been through something like this. And subscribe if you're not already, because there are more stories where this one came from. The spirit level is back on the workbench where it belongs. I look at it every morning when I start a job. The bubble stays centered when you hold it right. That is the whole point. This story is entirely fictional and created for entertainment and reflective purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental. Thank you for watching.